My guest today on the show is my colleague, Amy-Noelle. Amy-Noelle is a very experienced therapist and life coach. And over the last couple of years, she has developed, I think, a really interesting and important specialty, which is helping people um, who are on the journey towards health, particularly those among us who have been struggling with chronic or systemic health conditions that are um, a little more complex than the average day to day. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. Amy-Noelle, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm
Thank
excited.
you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So I have so many questions for you, but before we jump in, I was wondering if we could first talk a little bit about, your background in general, but also how you became interested in this particular subsegment of wellness and emotional
Yes,
health. Yeah.
yes. I think I've always uh, had an interest in health and looking at
Mm-hmm.
just overall holistically our how we live our life. And even when I work with my clients, I am looking at everything from a holistic approach and understanding what is going on,
Mm-hmm.
what are the deeper issues. Is it something physical? Is it looking at a psychological component, the physical component, the spiritual component? And so it's certainly always been an interest of mine to look at all things from a holistic approach. I think when I really started to look at my health in a whole new way, I was working with clients,
Mm-hmm.
and I started to get sick in the past couple of years. I was having all kinds of symptoms, would even appear
Yourself.
with
Yeah.
myself, just
Mm-hmm.
non-specific symptoms were going on. I was experiencing tingling and heart palpitations and
Mm.
tremors, and I was sweating in the night, and it appeared that I was having menopausal symptoms, and I
Mm-hmm.
was having allergies. And so I was going to so many doctors, and each of them were treating me for different symptoms and looking at maybe I was perimenopausal, or looking at that I had allergies, or treating me for migraines. And I was getting sicker and sicker, and I wasn't getting better, and it just didn't make any sense. And then one day I had gone to work like any other day. I'm working with a client, and I'm actually on a coaching call, and I knew something was very wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got off the phone, I did not have much time. I walked over to my colleague's office, and I literally collapsed. And
Oh,
this would be the moment that really became a defining moment, what would
yeah.
completely change my life.
Yeah. I
Um,
know. And if I could share, I remember that day because, so we've been working here at Growing Self together for a while, but that was towards even the beginning of our relationship. And I just remember talking to you and you were like in the hospital. It was like it was very intense and very real. And it must have been terrifying. And you're saying that that was kind of the wake up call when you were
wake
like,
up call,
there
because
is
what
something
I found out
different
is that there's
happening.
toxic mold in my
Hmm.
office,
Wow.
and I was exposed to toxic mold. And so
Mhm,
then I found out. I went to a holistic practitioner who
mhm.
specializes in functional medicine and integrative medicine,
Yeah.
and they diagnosed me with mold toxicity.
Wow.
And I didn't know anything about mold toxicity. I didn't know what
Mhm.
it was. I didn't even know that I could have that. I mean, I had heard of toxic mold, but I just
Yeah.
had no idea,
Yeah.
and would have not been what I thought I had.
Well, and you're based in Houston, and I guess this is like a thing in that part of the country, given like some of the flooding and things that you've had, it's
Yes.
happening more and more commonly.
It's
Wow.
there is an epidemic, and I just even recently have
Hmm.
a potential client who I may be working with, who
Hmm.
also, that's
Yeah.
why she came to me, is because she
Hmm.
also has mold toxicity.
Well,
And so we're
mhm.
seeing this more and more, and not just mold toxicity, but we're seeing chronic illness. And this isn't just in Houston. This
Yeah.
is really throughout the United States. More and more people are diagnosed with some type of chronic illness, whether it
Mm-hmm.
is chronic fatigue, Lyme disease, mold toxicity,
Mm-hmm.
fibromyalgia. I did maybe
Fibromyalgia. Uh-huh. No,
all
it's so
kinds of
true. Like
things.
even in like my own network, I have two people in my life that I care very much about who have been dealing with like these, fairly debilitating health issues, and they're going to doctors, and the doctors are like, "Yeah, I'm not really sure what's going on." And so there aren't answers, and they're really struggling. And so maybe, that would be a nice place to go. So if, somebody is listening to this, I mean, in your experience, what are the kinds of things that you've seen, clients and people that you work with, um, who are beginning to come to the conclusion that there's something more going on? And I'm not talking about like a asking you to give like medical advice, but like
Yeah.
from a almost like psychological or emotional perspective. I mean, is there a shift that you see in people from almost like, just blowing off their experiences and like just dealing and dealing and dealing to kind of arriving at this moment of, no, I'm having something more serious going on with me. Can you say a little bit more
Yes.
about that, just inner journey almost?
Yes. Well, I know when I have worked with clients, oftentimes when they are not understanding, why am I so tired all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Why is it that I am constantly not feeling like myself? And they don't know. And oftentimes when they're coming to me, they're sharing that they've been to many doctors, and they
Yeah.
start to feel that no one is listening to them. And that, am I crazy? Am I crazy? What is this? And so and even the people around them may not understand it. They
Mm-hmm.
may think that they're a hypochondriac, that
Right.
it's nothing, because the thing about chronic illness is that and even if it's mold toxicity, it doesn't mean that it's going to affect everyone who's in that environment.
Mm-hmm.
uh, Oftentimes the reason why we are susceptible to chronic illness is because of other underlying issues that have been going on for some time. So
Wow.
when people are first starting to really realize something is really wrong here and I don't know what to
Mm-hmm.
do, and just having that awareness of recognizing and not dismissing it becomes the first crucial protocol here, is to
Yeah.
recognize that, because oftentimes we'll try to push it down and say, because we're so busy and we got to get we have too much on our plate.
Mm-hmm.
We still kind of have this mentality that I don't have time for this. Just give me a pill. Just make it go away. And so we're going to a doctor. What can you do to nip it in the bud? And then it's not going away, and it's just getting worse. And the wake up call is getting louder and louder and louder until you are, whether you end up in the hospital or you collapse, you realize, I can't turn away from this anymore. I
Yeah.
have to look at this. I can't dismiss this anymore. And this
Mm-hmm.
actually becomes the first part of healing, is looking at it, is noticing it, is not pushing it away, is not dismissing it, and really just being aware of it and allowing it to be. And this is the place that's oftentimes the hardest, is
Mm-hmm.
accepting the reality that's
Yeah.
unfolding before you. And the reality that's unfolding before you is saying, it's saying something is wrong here. Your body is saying this. And this is
Right.
where, I oftentimes teach my clients that our bodies are speaking to us and trying to speak to us, but we are in our minds and in our stories. And our story says, I'm so busy. I have 2 kids to take care of. I have 3 kids to take care of. I have my job. I need to work 40, I have a 40, 50 hour
Mm-hmm.
work week. I don't have time for this. I can't take care of this. And yet the
Mm-hmm.
body is saying, but you must take care of this, because it's
Yeah.
only a matter of time where something is going to happen. And whether you end up in the hospital, or like me, collapse
Mm-hmm.
on the floor, you have no choice but
Right.
to look at this and to accept that this is a real reality that
Yeah.
can't be ignored.
But God, I'm just thinking as you're talking, like, in addition to like listening to your body, I'm just thinking about how much strength is required, sort of like emotionally, because you also really need to be validating your own experience, while I'm guessing other people are not validating the experience. Like, I'm just imagining going to like your standard issue
Yeah.
doctor who has 12.4 minutes to talk to you, and if it's more complex than that, they're sort of like, yeah, good luck with that, and kind of like walk out the door. And so like I would imagine feeling minimized
Yeah.
or kind of like brushed off, or like what you were saying, like, oh, it's perimenopause, don't worry about it, like that kind of thing. And so it's like you need to push back against people with a lot of power and a lot of authority to like
Yeah.
be your own advocate.
Advocate.
And I would imagine that that feels hard sometimes,
It
especially in the
feels so
beginning. Is
hard
that
because you
true?
can't
Yeah.
help but to have self-doubt. You
Yeah.
start doubting yourself
Mm-hmm.
and thinking, am I making this up? Am I some part of this? Am
Mm-hmm.
I somehow creating this? And so for a while, you may even begin to tell yourself that story, and then but the symptoms are there,
Yeah.
and you become so desperate. And
Mm-hmm.
in this place of desperation, yeah, it oftentimes requires
Yeah.
finding people who can support you. So meaning it means looking outside of
Mm-hmm.
conventional medicine. And I know for myself, that's what happened. I was going from doctor to doctor to doctor, realizing something is not right here. I remember I even went to one doctor because I was so severely dehydrated. And
Mm-hmm.
now when I look at why I was so severely dehydrated, it was because my body was fighting. It was fighting. I had all these
Mm-hmm.
toxins in me, and I didn't know how to rid them of it. And so
Yeah.
my liver was failing, and
Oh
so the
my.
way that and so my body was overcompensating. So I remember I went to one doctor because I was so I literally, now I know I'm not getting water to my cells. But then when I was so severely dehydrated, I remember a doctor had said to me, uh, um, well, if you're going to, because I even said that I couldn't quit going to the bathroom. I had urge incontinence. What
Mm-hmm.
do I do here?
Yeah.
And I even had the doctor said, you're taking in too many liquids, that even sometimes dehydration is caused from drinking too much. And I
Wow.
remember thinking, this does not make sense. And
Mm-hmm.
at some point, we have to begin to listen to ourselves. We
Yeah.
have to take a stand by allowing ourselves to recognize something is very
Mm-hmm.
wrong.
Yeah.
And we
But
may
then,
not know what it is, but that's the first step, is
yeah.
validating and seeing something
Mm-hmm.
really is wrong here. I don't know the answer, but something is not right here, and I'm going to need a different support system,
Mm-hmm.
a different support out there to
Yeah.
understand this better.
Yeah, that's what was kind of coming up for me as you were talking. Like that step one is validating yourself, but then really it sounds like a very important piece of this journey is like expanding your network of support and connecting with people who can um, maybe have a different perspective and be allies for you on this journey and be able to offer a perspective or solutions. Like, so what you're saying is just because if you can't find the help that you need in one place, don't give up. Like
Don't give
keep
up.
looking and keep seeking. Mm-hmm.
Keep
Yeah.
looking, and look for what I do know is that what's so interesting on my own
Mm-hmm.
path is finding that so many doctors who now specialize in chronic illness, they didn't always specialize in chronic illness.
Hmm.
They actually were in conventional medicine, but what happened is they themselves experienced some chronic
Oh,
illness and
interesting.
found
I didn't
that
know that.
they found, even Dr. Hyman, who is a pioneer of functional medicine,
Uh-huh.
he had mold toxicity,
Hmm.
and he had heavy metals, and he could not find the answers with conventional medicine. He recognized that there was a limitation, and he speaks a lot about this, that even in medical school, he
Mm-hmm.
says that they were not taught about these kinds of chronic illnesses, and that they still aren't taught today. So he had to kind of go on a different path and looking for answers, and recognizing that there were limitations in what
Yeah.
conventional medicine had to offer.
Wow.
And so this is what we're learning, is a lot of doctors who are specialized in chronic illness is because they themselves they are living with chronic illness themselves. And so there is so much help out there now. Uh,
That's awesome though, because like for somebody with like, medical knowledge, but also that has like empathy and actually gets it because they have lived through it. I could just imagine that that feels so good to be connecting with a person who can help you, who also like gets it.
who gets it?
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
absolutely. Yes,
yeah.
absolutely. It, it's
Hmm.
it just having the right direction. When I realized when I was going to all these doctors, and even when I started going to a holistic doctor,
Mm-hmm.
they may not have all the answers,
Mm-hmm.
but you start to recognize each doctor has something very valuable to offer.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I was going to this one practitioner who was specialized in integrative and functional medicine,
Mm-hmm.
what she had done for me is at least gotten me on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
And that and just to be on the right path. And
Yeah.
and I, in the beginning, I was taking so many supplements, but
Mm-hmm.
realizing that there was a lot of gray and not understanding what was going on with
Yeah.
me. And so it doesn't mean when you get with one doctor and you're given an answer and something starts working, it doesn't mean that everything is going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
It's chronic illness. What we know is it's very hard to treat,
Yeah.
because it looks different in everyone, and there's no and it's not understood. It's very
Mm-hmm.
murky, it's gray. And so even when you start to get help, you may
Mm-hmm.
have to constantly be searching and looking for additional resources, which
Mm-hmm.
I've had to do to kind of
Yeah.
piece together a team where I'm able to see benefits and able
Sure.
to be in a better place today.
What a
Wow.
journey. But I mean, like the buzzwords that are kind of popping up into my mind as you're talking, I mean, just like persistence is also this really big one, that what it looks like is trying something, seeing how it goes, and then modifying it again and again and again until you really begin to create a system that works for you. And that isn't something that you're just going to be handed. I mean, you're describing an inner process where it's a lot of personal responsibility and advocating for yourself and like checking in with yourself, because it's also easy to go to like the holistic doctor who's like, okay, take 27 supplements and stand on your head 3 times a day and you'll be better. And what
Yeah.
you're saying is like, okay, so I tried that, and actually, that wasn't the whole answer for me either. So you're really like, you need to stay in this empowered place, really,
Yes.
like
What
self
I know is
directed. Mm-hmm.
absolutely, yes. What I know is crucial is
Yeah.
you need a doctor who will be able to follow up with you, who has a
Mm-hmm.
team. Because
Yeah.
what is true about chronic illness is that you're so fragile. So
Mm-hmm.
even when you take a supplement, the supplement may begin to make you sick. And so there needs to be a constant
Yeah.
following up with a client, meaning,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that supplement's not working. Let's take you off that. Let's try this, because it's such
Mm-hmm.
a delicate process.
Yeah.
And you need to have communication with your doctor or their assistant or some kind of support team where you're
Mm-hmm.
able to call them and you're able to say, this isn't working, or you're able to email someone. Because so much about treating chronic illness, that's what it requires. It
Mm-hmm.
requires going back and forth, communicating,
Yeah.
recognizing what's not working, not allowing you to stay on something that's not working. And so
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes some doctors are not able to give you this kind of attention,
Mm-hmm.
and you do feel in the dark,
Yeah.
and you start to regress, and it feels scary because you think you're doing
Mm-hmm.
so much, and
Yeah.
then here you are now regressing again, and you don't understand why. So that
Sure.
was very important for me to find a
Mm-hmm.
team of doctors where there was follow up. Who can I
Yeah.
call when I need to call someone?
Gosh, and I'm just imagining, like, so there's the medical side, but then like, our side of being in a role of supporting somebody who's going through this. It's like so much support, and to be able to just like have a place to be like, and then this happened, and not again the medical advice piece, but that like coming back into yourself and what do you need, and for somebody to be able to say, I think I actually need more support than I'm getting from this doctor. I mean, like and to validate that and then go back out there and have like the strength to go back out there. Because I mean, I just like, as you're talking about this, I'm almost feeling because you don't feel good. You have low energy. You're probably hurting. And then it takes so much strength and energy to
Uh,
say, hey, Dr. So-and-so, let's try this again, or to say like,
yes,
that's
yes.
hard. That is
It's
always
so hard
hard. And so
because
to
oftentimes you
have
only
that
have a few
support
hours,
system.
and and
Yeah.
oftentimes people who have chronic illness, these are debilitating
Oh,
symptoms.
I
And so
bet.
there are hours of the day where it is debilitating. And
Yeah.
what I say to my clients who are
Mhm.
going through something like this, and what I'm doing when I'm in an episode, this
Yeah.
is where mindfulness, it
Mhm.
becomes your support system. And so
Yay.
oftentimes, if I am in an episode or if my clients are talking about this, we are practicing what it means to stay on the breath. Because something happens when you are experiencing pain,
Mhm.
and what happens is our mind wants to concoct uh, fear stories of what's going to
Mhm.
happen. And so we can easily spiral down into a fear place, a fear
Mhm.
mindset. And this will cripple us too.
Yeah.
And so we will begin to say, well, does this mean I won't be ever to work again? Does this mean I won't be able to take vacations? Does this
Mhm.
will my life never be the same? And so we'll continue to go on uh, with these kind of what if scenarios.
Mhm.
And so what becomes so crucial is when you are breathing and you are staying on the breath. It is okay to have fear, but there is a difference between having the fear and becoming it. So
Mm.
as you have the fear, yes, this is scary, this is, and you validate that, but you stay on the breath and you almost are just so focused on your breath, and you're allowing yourself to notice all your symptoms. It's almost as
Mhm.
if you are detached. And what I mean by detached is that you are outside of what's happening to your physical body. So,
Yeah.
meaning you're watching it, you're watching this tremor that you're experiencing, or you're watching this chronic pain that you're
Mhm.
feeling. And what that does for you is that it just keeps you from not moving into a fear place. So,
Mhm.
once you continue to watch it, and this is what I would do, I was continue to watch it and breathe and watch it and
Mhm.
breathe. So I wouldn't go into the fear. So I wouldn't go into the fear. Then
Mhm.
something else happens. And this is what I often ask my clients to do, is to practice self-compassion statements. So
Mm.
meaning to notice what is going well. Anytime, whatever has gotten you through a previous episode, whatever has allowed you to get through an episode, to have these self-compassion statements, to say, I am breathing well. I've been able to take a good breath. I see that my body is improving in this way. That, today I had less tremors, or I know that you can get through this. You got through this the last time. I see
Mhm.
that you are working so hard for me. Even I will talk to my liver. I will say, I know you're working so hard for me, and you are detoxing. You did such a fabulous job the other day, whether it was detoxing or you're having less migraines. And because what this does is that you're taking your mind to the most positive, true perspective. You are focusing on what is the most, this is not woo woo, this is
Mhm.
truly focusing on what is the most positive, true perspective here. And this is allowing you to, it's almost like an IV drip of self-compassion,
Mhm.
where you are nourishing every cell of your body with this loving compassion.
Yeah.
And because what happens is when we go into the fear mindset, not only are we spiraling down into a place where we're becoming more frightened, but we
Mhm.
aren't able to harness what little energy we have. It drains our energy, which
Oh,
is so precious.
no, but I mean, and that what you're saying and is so well documented that when we are having a elevated physiological response. So fight or flight, which is what happens when we're feeling afraid or threatened, right? I
Yes,
mean, it dumps stress hormones into our system, adrenaline, cortisol. It changes our respiration, our heart rate, and also very well documented that it results in a suppression of your immune system.
yes,
That like your mind body is so connected. And so what you're saying through, and just for listeners who don't know you the way that I know you, Amy-Noelle has many years of experience in mindfulness training, and she is a very good teacher and practitioner of this. But you're saying to use those mindfulness skills to, notice the emotions, but not get sucked down the drain and have it turn into this like total like panic mode, so that you're doing everything that you can mentally to stay in a good place and almost like not make the situation worse. Like you're observing it, you're being compassionate with yourself very deliberately, because without that intentional practice, it can mushroom and get even worse,
Yes,
just
yes.
internally. Yeah.
Yes, and the other part to this is that there's oftentimes an emotional component
Yeah.
to healing. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
oftentimes when we allow ourselves to stay on the breath, what we're also allowing isn't allowing. We're allowing the
Hmm.
experience to happen. We are accepting this reality. We are
Hmm.
allowing whatever to unfold in the moment. And so oftentimes or what can happen is that maybe a deep emotion will come up. And you know what this could be a trapped emotion, so meaning that oftentimes, an emotion we've repressed,
Mm.
uh, and and this will oftentimes come up. And so it's important
Yeah.
to also be with our emotions,
Hmm.
and experience them, and experience this emotional part, that is very much a part of healing.
Yeah.
And whether it's a trapped emotion, meaning that, there may be old pain, there may be a past trauma. And so even as you are mindful, it allows for this space of allowing,
Hmm. Yeah.
and for other emotions to come up, other felt
Yeah.
experiences.
I get that. And I could almost see, like, because you're being put back in a place where you are, relatively speaking, like helpless in some ways, and hurting, and having these very like basic primal things come up. And also, this is making me think. I am, as you know, a card carrying nerd. So I like, ooh, new scientific study. Like, I'm going to read that. And I can't remember what publication it was in, but it was a well done study where it was taking a look at the sickness response that both humans and animals have, which is an emotional state that goes hand in hand with any significant illness or injury. And the emotional state, like if you had to describe it, is very much like depression. It is feeling tired, it is low energy, it is not wanting to do anything, not taking pleasure in things that you might ordinarily enjoy, but also having this sort of like more negative cognitive state around, like, no, that's going to suck, that won't work, blah, blah, blah. But like the whole study was taking a look at how being in that emotional slash mental state when we are like ill or injured physiologically is very evolutionarily adaptive, because what it leads to is people not venturing out and expending a lot of energy and not putting themselves in risky situations where they could get sick or injured further. And it's also mobilizing their support systems. Like if you're just laying in bed and you're like, I can't do anything, like people around you are like, oh, she needs help. And so there are like so many adaptive things going on, but subjectively it feels like being depressed.
Mhm.
And I wonder if you've observed that in some of your clients. Like, I know that some of with my clients, not chronic health clients necessarily, but like people who have just, had a surgery or something like that. And then will come back a week later and be like, I think I'm depressed. To be like, actually, let's talk about this piece of it, because it's such a important component of healing. But I think that subjectively, it doesn't feel like a positive thing, because you just kind of feel like sad and tired. But it is part of what healing involves for many people. Do you encounter that in your with your
Yes.
clients?
Uh,
Hmm.
just going into this place
Yeah.
of losing interest and pleasures, losing interest in
Yeah.
things that they once enjoyed,
Hmm.
not understanding what this feeling is, not
Yeah.
understanding, why suddenly they're not feeling so positive.
Hmm.
Yes, I mean, I
Yeah.
absolutely have clients who, um, are experiencing a decline
Hmm.
in their positivity, and a
Yeah.
decline in what things that they took pleasure in. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And so like being able to normalize, like, this is what happens to everyone when we're sick.
we're,
It's part of your body's way of recovering. And yes, it sucks emotionally.
yes, well, and I think that
Yeah.
just what's going on with your body, even
Hmm.
when I recognized when I was going in an episode, oftentimes we call everything anxiety.
Yeah.
And I remember even a couple of years ago when I first started experiencing symptoms, I
Hmm.
was on the highway, and I was experiencing heart palpitations,
Oh.
and I was experiencing what they call air hunger, and I couldn't breathe. And because I couldn't breathe, I had a panic attack. And
So
what was so
scary.
interesting is I dismissed it and just said, why did I have a panic attack on the highway? And suddenly I was
Mhm.
afraid of being on the highway. But now I realized it was because I had truly experienced air hunger,
Yeah.
where I couldn't breathe, and I was experiencing heart palpitations. Well, what I know to be true is that when we are experiencing these symptoms in our body, we don't feel right, and
Hmm.
we often don't know how to language that. We
Yeah.
don't know what that's called, and so oftentimes the umbrella term to everything, the physical symptoms that we're experiencing, is called anxiety. But really, anxiety is experienced different in the sense of just having anxiety because of our thoughts,
Hmm.
and the kind of anxiety where, because of
Hmm.
having social anxiety or anxiety about
Yeah.
stressors in our life. This is very
Hmm.
different than when you are sick and something
Yeah.
is really wrong with your body. And
Yeah.
the system
It's like
thinks
a physiological
you're experiencing an
threat.
imbalance.
Hmm.
And this
Hmm.
imbalance is what I think you were speaking of, is that then causes you to experience these kind of depressed feelings because nothing is working right.
Yeah.
You're literally are having all kinds of things
Hmm.
that are out of balance, and this feeling is
Hmm.
it feels not stable, and
Yeah.
so this causes one to experience whether what we call depression,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
we experience this because we
Hmm.
truly aren't, we may not be producing the proper amounts of serotonin. All kinds of things are going
Oh,
on,
yeah.
and that's why it's so important, the piece of mindfulness,
Hmm.
because oftentimes it's the only thing we can do in those moments is to hold the awareness. Because when you hold the awareness, it allows you to not completely be identified with the symptoms.
Hmm.
The symptoms can be a very scary thing. And so if we become so identified, meaning all I'm thinking about is, oh my gosh, my heart's not beating right, my heart's not beating
Yeah.
right. But in the place of awareness, I'm watching it not beating right, and I'm sending it love, and
Hmm.
I'm saying self-compassion statements. It doesn't mean we don't do the doing part. You're taking the supplements, you're doing the doing part, but
Hmm.
in that moment, you're just allowing yourself to watch it, to be
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
And in this place, we won't get totally mired in fear.
Right, right. Almost like cultivating that, like that radical acceptance idea, of this is happening, and I am supporting myself through this moment mindfully. And I think what you were saying before too is that uh, being unwell physically, that there can be physical symptoms and also emotional symptoms that are all worth paying attention to and honoring, as opposed
Yeah,
to like pushing away or minimizing. And
yes.
and so
And
it's
this is
like
why
that
even
listening to yourself. Hmm.
yes, and this is why
Yeah.
even a practice of
Oh
gratitude
yeah.
is, every day
Hmm.
I make sure and that I notice, what is going right for my body, or not just even that, just anywhere where things are going right in terms of any
Hmm.
doctor, how have they helped me,
Yeah.
what nugget can I take away from this
Right.
doctor, or is there a book that I came across. And this
Hmm.
is what I help my clients do, is
Right.
noticing. It's so important to notice what are the things that are going well with
Hmm.
your body, with a piece of information you've come across that's been helpful, with whether it's the session that's been helpful, what can you take away from it?
Hmm.
Because in this place, this is where we can align with hope, rather than aligning
Yeah.
with despair.
What a good point. Yeah. And again, like really, what a deliberate practice, because I'm hearing again that it can be very easy to get like almost hyper focused on what doesn't feel good and what's not working out, and maybe what I have lost or am losing. And instead, like, no, there, even if you are struggling with this, there are so many things that you do still have, and to be deliberately focusing on that. Oh, that's so empowering. Now, and another thing, and I hope that this is okay to bring up, I know that from our just personal conversations and the little bits you shared about your work with clients, is that one thing that seems like it's a really important piece for people who are on a journey of healing is to really become deeply committed to prioritizing their health and the time that they need to take care of themselves, and like making some shifts, I mean, from that like go, 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 taking care of everybody and everything else kind of mindset to no, if I'm going to be well, here's what I need to do to take care of me.
Yeah.
Can you say a little bit more about that, and what that kind of just like almost lifestyle transformation you've seen with people?
Yeah. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you start to realize, that you need to detox your life, not even just your bodies.
Yeah.
That there needs to be and if one is experiencing sickness, oftentimes it will bring them to this place when they are,
Mm-hmm.
if they are present with all that is going on with them and recognizing that their health is the most important thing. Oftentimes, it they start to realize, wow, I need to live differently. I
Mm-hmm.
need to, and this means setting appropriate boundaries. It means to start getting really clear about what are our core values
Mm-hmm.
and what are our non-negotiables. And what I mean by, oftentimes when we look at our values, some values are flexible. That means they
Mm-hmm.
won't compromise something.
Yeah.
They won't compromise our well-being. It,
Mm-hmm.
and that's the difference between a flexible value and a core value, and what we would define as a non-negotiable. That
Mm-hmm.
something that compromises our well-being, uh, then it doesn't allow us to thrive. It doesn't allow us to live fully. And so we have to begin to take note of that. So first, there's a noticing of that. There's
Yeah.
a noticing of how many hours a day can I work without moving into depletion,
Mm-hmm.
without moving into a place where suddenly I am fatigued and I am getting sick and I am so tired, and so it takes great discernment on our part to begin to notice that,
Mm-hmm.
and so it may mean that you start to give your time differently
Mm-hmm.
to engagements. It may mean that setting boundaries with where you give your time, yeah, and
Mm-hmm.
and noticing maybe I'm giving my time too much on social media, or maybe I'm working too many hours a week at my job.
Yeah.
um, and also what's so interesting is sometimes you even begin to notice things you need to do more of. Maybe I need to call my sister. These are all ways of to beginning to see how you want to live your life differently, and how there is this opportunity to detox your life, because
Yeah.
sickness will do that to you,
Mm-hmm.
where it seems that the things that once matter, you start to recognize this is not the most important thing in my life right now, and
Yeah.
these are the things that matter to me most. And so there is a great shedding that happens.
Yeah, no, I could totally see that, and so necessary, and I think that is hard for. So, I mean, even for me personally, I mean, knock on wood, I have not had that kind of chronic thing, but like even in my own life, I know that I have noticed that if I get exercise on a regular basis, I feel like 10x better in every way, but it's difficult to set boundaries around that, like with my family and other obligations. But I could almost see how um, having this kind of experience that really does feel like almost a wake up call. It's that it becomes almost like non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Like you have to set these boundaries or you're not going to be okay, Yeah,
Yes. Yes.
that's,
You start to live in the have to. I
mm-hmm.
must do this, because you recognize what the alternative will be.
Yeah,
Will be.
totally. Oh,
And
well, I know we're running out of time, but I have a couple other quick questions for you. If are you okay to stay a couple more
yes,
minutes?
yeah.
Okay. So one of them is, um, let's see, how do I ask this in a coherent way? Um, there are very like real as a heart attack, chronic health conditions that are not easy to diagnose. They have subtle kind of systemic um, symptoms, and they are very, very real. I watched a very interesting show, again, going back to my nerdness. I can't remember if it was on Netflix, but it was a show of where there were people who had undiagnosed conditions that were so debilitating. I think it was even through like the New York Times or something. There was a doctor who was like fielding these questions and like helping people get these diagnoses for these very rare conditions, like even through genetic testing and like flying them to Italy. It was very interesting. I wish I could remember the name of the show. So anyway, so that is, you're looking at me like, what's the
No,
question? I'm getting there.
no,
So,
I'm listening and oh,
so, but I mean, like, so these are all
oh,
very, very, very real things. And there is also, in my experience, an overlap between the way that we can interpret things that have more to do with our way of thinking about things that is maybe not necessarily related to a health condition. There's an overlap here. Like, so for example, I'm thinking of somebody that I worked with who you could probably say did actually meet criteria for hypochondriasis, you know, and he was having this sort of weird symptom, and he was pretty convinced that it was something bad, and he was going to doctor to doctor to doctor. And he was a very like intellectual person.
mhm,
And in talking to him, like getting him to describe what was going on for him, it's like, what you're describing is actually the experience of what it feels like to have anxiety. Like he noticed, you know, his heart rate would kind of pick up. You would feel tense. You would sort of feel a little swimmy mentally. And you know, having a hard time like remembering things. And this is the experience of anxiety. But
yeah,
instead of being able to say, yeah, I think that's anxiety, it was really turning into, no, it must be a health
mm,
condition
mm,
in his mind. And so we needed to do a lot of work around this, because I do think that it is a I mean, there's a whole body of research and literature around people somaticizing psychological symptoms and experiences. I mean, that is a very real thing. And you see it with people who have maybe a lot of stigma around the idea of having something like anxiety or depression, that it sort of manifests into these physical symptoms that, and it's not saying that people aren't having the physical experiences, that those are very real, but that it's not necessarily based on illness. And when they can just sort of embrace this idea of, no, this is actually what it feels like to be a human,
mm,
or this is what it feels like to be an aging human, or this is what it feels like to have a little bit of transient anxiety sometimes. Like it's just sort of a life experience that is not an illness or an emergency. Like this is also definitely a thing, right? And so I'm wondering, like, what you've seen over the years in your practice about how to tease some of that apart. And the reason why I want to ask about this is because on the one hand, it can be so easy to like minimize yourself, blow it off. And we've been talking a lot about how, like, no, I need to listen to myself. And how do we almost like interpret things? I don't want to use the word correctly, but like there could be a lot of different explanations for the
yeah,
reason why people feel certain things. And how can you help people tease apart, is this a health issue for which there is a treatment, or are you experiencing, you know, the more annoying parts of what it feels like to be a human? And how do we, you know, glide through life without pathologizing that or freaking out when it happens? Because there needs to be that piece of it too. Does that make it? I don't know if I'm describing that
yeah, yes.
coherently.
No, yeah, it makes complete sense. You know, oftentimes, uh, the first place I start
Mm-hmm.
is where the client looking at their own readiness. So, meaning
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes that beginning work is they just need that validation piece.
Yeah.
The validation piece comes in because they're coming in, and even if the symptoms come from a mindset they're real.
They're
So
real. They are
they're real.
definitely
They
real.
are
Yes.
experiencing it. Whether someone's
Mm-hmm.
if anyone has had a panic attack, you know that your heart is truly not.
Yes.
It's beating fast. You know that
Mm-hmm.
you're sweating. That these are that. Yes, it's real in the sense that it produces
Right.
physiological responses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that first piece is wanting to kind of develop, create the safety that
Yeah.
so that we can go into the deeper work, and then really understanding. It requires going into a little bit of the family of origin,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding a little bit of their background.
Yeah.
They may have a story around sickness. They may
Mm-hmm.
have a story around, because oftentimes there could be a story around of having to compensate
Mm-hmm.
around being someone who was sick when they were growing up, or around
Mm-hmm.
some stress in the home. Oftentimes we have defense mechanisms, and we learn a way of being. We, in some way, even maybe, and who knows what that is for. It can be something different for each individual person.
Mm-hmm.
All it is that we cope through some
Yeah.
in our
But,
life.
and this is such a great, like, I'm even just thinking, like, from a family systems perspective, that, like, perhaps, like what you're saying, growing up, the only way that I got loved and taken care of is when I was sick. And that you're saying that that can be something to just, like,
To
observe.
bring,
Yeah.
yes, to shed some light on, to bring to the forefront, so that there is some
Yeah.
understanding of uh, that that being sick, and
Mm-hmm.
it somehow allowed for uh, a reward then, that somehow
Mm.
it was needed then, that
Yeah.
somehow it was needed then. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so this is one part of it, is gaining understanding of where does it stem from, but the other part is developing a capacity to feel our feelings and to
Yes.
be with our discomfort. So sometimes, because perhaps we weren't, uh, perhaps in some way, uh, we weren't allowed to express emotion. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't the way that our caretakers showed love.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the part where we had to learn to, we didn't have our needs met. We
Yeah.
weren't able to emotionally express ourselves. So oftentimes when I work with clients, what we would call meta emotions, feeling our
Mm-hmm.
feelings, that oftentimes even we will do, I will provide an assessment or a questionnaire around this. And oftentimes they may say, I just try to get on with it. When we question on
Mm-hmm.
how do you deal with your emotion, and it's just, I try
Mm-hmm.
to get on with it, and try to get past it.
Yeah.
And so this, in some ways, we are repressing it, and we are not
Mm-hmm.
allowing ourselves to feel it. And
Yeah.
so then we look for something external when we feel any kind of discomfort. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like strengthening a muscle, our ability
Yeah.
to be able to sit with discomfort, our
Mm-hmm.
ability to be able to sit with whatever emotion arises. And
Yeah.
in some ways, we weren't taught that. That
No.
has to do with emotional regulation. And there's so much
Mm-hmm.
studies around what does it mean to be emotionally regulated. All you have to do is go to a park where there's a bunch of children and see them cry. And we know that it's very hard to be around a child who is crying. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes, what we will see, even by well meaning caretakers, is that they may try to deflect.
Mm-hmm.
From the child from having this
Yeah.
experience.
You're
And
fine.
here's your piece of
Mm-hmm.
candy, or why don't we come over here? You're missing all the fun. Let's go play over here. And what
Right.
that does is it takes someone out of their emotional experience. And so
Yeah.
in that moment, we're already teaching them that it is not, it's not good to have a negative emotion. It's not good
Mm-hmm.
to stay here. Emotion was never negative,
Yeah.
but now it's experienced as a negative
Mm-hmm.
because we've been taught to leave it. We've been
Yeah.
taught it's not good to stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's with, here's a piece of candy, or let's go over here and play and have
Mm-hmm.
fun. And so part of this is we don't know how to be with discomfort. We don't know
Yeah.
how to be with our pain.
Mm-hmm. Completely. We talk about this a lot, like in the emotional intelligence piece of it, that children get sort of like rushed through, minimized, and they're trained to not take information from their feelings or recognize them as feelings. And feelings are physical sensations. Like, I don't know about you, everybody's a little bit different, but I know that when I feel really sad or bad, sometimes like I will feel that sensation, the emotion of sadness or badness, like in my stomach, like my stomach will kind of hurt. Or when I feel anxious, I feel like almost a pain in my solar plexus. And that when people aren't familiar with the way their own emotions feel in their body, they can be misinterpreted
Yeah.
as
Yes.
symptomatic of
You're
something. And
making me think of, when sometimes I will do a breathing exercise
mm-hmm,
with my clients, and oftentimes we aren't breathing correctly. Our
yeah,
breath is very shallow. We're breathing from the
mm-hmm,
chest instead of the diaphragm. But someone who has a lot of anxiety, when you really think about anxiety, anxiety is a holding in.
mm-hmm,
And so it's in some ways it's because you're wanting to avoid experience. Think about it.
yeah,
When you don't want something to happen, what do? We hold our breath.
yeah,
Hold our breath when we don't want something to happen. It's a physiological response when we
mm-hmm,
don't want something to happen. So, and this is what we learn to do. We hold our breath. We hold, we constrict. We hold, we constrict. And this is what anxiety is doing. It's holding, it's constricting. It doesn't want it to happen. And that's why we want to exert so much control. We don't want the anxiety. We want to exert so much control. And so oftentimes when I'm first teaching how to breathe correctly, this can actually produce more anxiety, because
mm-hmm.
what happens is if you don't breathe correctly, what happens is if you try to show, if someone now is focused on their breath, it starts to make them anxious when they realize that they're not breathing. When
I
they
could see
realize
that.
they're not breathing, because you
Yeah,
realize, oh, I'm not breathing, and then you actually panic.
yeah,
And so when you think about someone who this the client who can
mm-hmm,
suddenly amplify all of their symptoms, this
mm-hmm,
also may happen, is that they feel discomfort, and it feels so uncomfortable they don't know what to
mm-hmm.
do with it, and
Yeah,
now they're thinking about the discomfort,
yes,
and now the thoughts around the discomfort, it magnifies it.
right,
You are growing the discomfort, and this is where it turns
mm-hmm,
into panic. And then when it turns
yeah.
into panic, you are convinced something is wrong with me, something is wrong with me.
Yes, and it's like this whole feedback loop. So, and again, I mean, there are very real health conditions, but I think that this is always important to be thinking about, and just like what, and that's why this is so hard, I think, and why people do require so much support, is like teasing all of this stuff out can be very complex, because it's multi-dimensional, and it does incorporate your physical health and emotions and the way that you're thinking, and your social systems and your history. I mean, there's so much. And I think, and I don't know if you do this, but as a rule of thumb, what I typically do, and you have a lot more experience with this particular issue than I do, but I always encourage people, like, go get it checked out. Like, if you are worried that there is something wrong, like, get the tests, talk to whoever, like, get it checked out really thoroughly, and then let's see what we have left over, because that can sometimes, I think, help just parse apart what is happening, or at least like rule out some things, which can just like begin to help us shape the focus of what we should be talking about and working on, because it can be hard, it really can.
Yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
Yes, you can still get it
mm-hmm.
checked out, like you said.
Yeah,
And even if whether you do have something or you don't have something, a lot of the mindfulness skills apply either
totally.
way. Because even when you have chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes uh, the part of not moving into fear, the part of staying in the aware place, the mindfulness component is very much needed. Whether you are experiencing real chronic pain or not experiencing,
Or emotional pain, something.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
it's all learning how to be with our emotion, with our
Yeah.
feeling, whatever is arising,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
whatever is
internal
happening in the body.
experience. Yeah. Well, okay. So then one last thing, and then I'll let you go, because I know I could keep talking to you all day. But I've heard you mention several times that although your personal journey has been so hard, and you are walking with people who are dealing with very, very hard, real things that don't have an easy solution, I've heard you say several times that you feel like this has been a gift in some ways, and also that you work with clients towards helping them shift into that like space. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean by that, and how this type of life experience can in some ways eventually be a gift?
Yeah. Yes. Well, in these moments where
Hmm.
there's nowhere else to go but to be with your pain,
Yeah.
uh, it requires one to go deeper into being present with whatever is going on in their bodies, and it requires this hyper focused awareness.
Hmm.
And when we are able to be that way, oftentimes the gift is that maybe an emotion comes up, maybe an unmet need comes up, maybe a deep plea comes up that you haven't answered in a long time. Maybe there's a self discovery and realizing that I need to live my life differently. And so every time you are in these moments where you're having to practice radical awareness, or you're having
Hmm.
to be present with everything that's happening in your body, you're having to allow these emotions to arise, you're opening up a space where wisdom comes through. And this
Yeah.
is where the gift is that you start tuning into your body, and your body there is body wisdom. Your body
Hmm.
begins to show you what it is that you need, how you maybe need to live your life differently, or you may recognize uh, uh, something, how you want to change in the way that you live your life. And so, in these moments, there's insight comes, wisdom comes, and then you find yourself when you re-engage with the world, you find yourself that you are changed. These
Yeah.
shifts become the gifts in the way that you are changed, in the way that you decide, I would like to spend more time doing the things that I love. I would like to not go to some of these engagements that aren't fulfilling. I would
Hmm.
like to, you start to realize what are some of the things that I don't want to do anymore, and what are some of the things that I do want to do. And so in some ways, yes, you are kind of getting more clear about how you want to live your life. And so this is the way it's been a gift for me,
Yeah. Oh,
and
that's
for so many of
beautiful.
my clients too.
Well, but and how wonderful for them. I'm just thinking to have the support of you that just because of your own life experience and perspective, like to have so much compassion and empathy for what they're going through, but also like a guide to help them move into this really positive space. Like even though this has been a challenging situation, let's take a look at the gifts that it has brought you. And you're saying, to really make important, meaningful life changes because of this that are really more authentic and healthy for you. I mean, my goodness, that's amazing. So what that's and this might be a nice moment for us to pause is on this beautiful idea. So thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming and just talking to me about this subject today. I know it's near and dear to your heart, and I hope that this conversation has been helpful to our listeners. So for those of you interested in learning more about Amy-Noelle She, you can learn more about her on our website at growingself.com. And Amy, I think that you have some things coming out on the blog in the next couple of months too. So we'll stay tuned for that, and we'll be sure to put it all out on our Growing Self Instagram, which is growing_self, so you can keep track of Amy-Noelle and what she's up to.
Thank you
Sound
so
good?
much.